just start by saying I'll have to admit I'm a football traditionalist. I like things the way they always were. I mean, I don't like them changing a game. I don't like doing that. If I go to play putt-putt, I don't like them changing the rules. I go to a restaurant, I don't like the menu changing. I don't like the grocery stores moving around where the macaroni is. I don't like any of that. Get it set the way it ought to be and keep it that way. I'm a traditionalist. I mean, I don't apologize for that. I came up in the days when a committee picked the national champion with polls. That's how it was done. Now they're complaining because the committee picks TCU to get their you-know-whats pounded. Okay? A lot of talk about that. I don't want to talk about any of that because by the time I get this published, people will be done ranting about Georgia's 65-7 stomp of TCU. We'll have to talk about something else. No one's going to want to talk about that game for 6 months. And what caused that game might need to be talked about, no doubt. And playoff expansion is part of that process. I see people on the internet saying, hey, playoff expansion will eliminate the TCU blowouts in the finals, maybe. Who knows? TCU could have entered a 12-team playoff this year, and I bet you they could have got to 4. And that's what their whole season was, playing like they're in an elimination game. Scrappy team. Too bad they had to go out like that. We can talk about that if you want, but tonight we're talking about the big picture changes that's going to affect college football, like it or not. Traditionalist or not. Whatever your choice of beef. Or tofu. But a traditionalist I am, and I don't like them changing the playoff, but I understand why they're doing it. It does make a lot of sense. And we'll talk about that. Like, why does that make sense? Because it ties right in to the big picture issue that we'll talk about at some point, is that I believe college football is shrinking, not expanding. Well, what do you mean they're expanding all over? No, maybe they are, but the product is shrinking. The number of athletes that can play at the level of an Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, the number of players who could actually fill rosters at that level, you don't have even 12 teams. You never will. There's not enough football players of that caliber to fill 12 teams. And changing the playoffs ain't going to add no more Jimmies and no more Joes. I can guarantee you that. All right. Where were we? Yeah, we're talking about playoff expansion and all that. We're going to talk in depth about that. Comment, give us some clues of what you want to hear. Because we got the whole off season. It's football in January. You're watching a football video in January. So if I ramble, you're just going to have to live with it. What are you going to do? Go watch the Georgia game again? All right, so if you want to keep up with the latest changes in college football and the big picture, you have to know the big picture to know the little picture. We get into the bigger picture of college football, so we don't necessarily get into nitty-gritties of which defensive end is transferring today. But we do keep up with the transfer portal. We keep up with things like NIL. But those are just symptoms. Those are smaller scale things to think about compared to the big picture. And so the big picture is changing dramatically. We got a year left, maybe, before the changes are actually in effect. You know what I'm talking about. The SEC is expanding, Big Ten expanding, playoffs expanding, NIL expanding, transfer portal, who knows? And those are not minor concerns for sport. We're also going to talk a little bit about the game itself and why certain things will always be true in the game of football, no matter how much they change the rules, unless they change the shape of the ball or something. We'll talk about that. So you can't talk about college football without talking about a football. So the game of football, we're going to talk about that. Like what kind of football traits do teams need to have to get their goals met. Like, different conferences play different. And we're going to talk about the game itself and what we believe is the best way to play it, maybe. All right, this is where we like to say, first of all, thank you for tuning in to On Top as we talk about the state of college football. Here, fresh on the off season. Second day of no football. So, you came to the right place because you need a football fix. Let me introduce you to my producer, Kyle, who also has his own sports podcast, but I am prohibited from telling you about it due to, why can't I tell you? Because he hasn't actually got the title approved yet. Okay, whatever. So he's got one of those long-standing podcasts that's at least 3 hours in longevity. But he's still coming on our show, and I'd be nice to him because he controls the way I sound. He's my sound producer. He's the one that takes all those whistles out. He's a great guy. Anyway, but Kyle may interject occasionally. And Kyle, why don't you tell him about what you told me just a minute ago? You mean the conferences and the titles? Yeah, Kyle. You said something about the Big Ten needs to change their name because they represent college football, which is academic. They can't be getting their name has to match their total of teams. They're the Big Ten. They got 11 teams, 12 teams, 14 now. They didn't count Penn State for a few years because they had a deal. They wouldn't count them until they won the Big Ten, and that deal, so you can't count them. But they got 14, about to add 2 more. They got 16 teams, and they're calling themselves the Big Ten. Well, actually, they call themselves Big. What's it? What? Well, on their jerseys, they only say Big. Wait, so is that the name? Big Conference? How old are they? 3? They can't get in college at 3. They're not that smart. But they did add some Pac-12 teams, so they might be getting a little smarter. So Kyle, tell them what you said to me. We should have to count the teams in the name. We should make them change their name. It has to be done. It's academic. You can't say Big Ten when you have 16 teams. So we came up with some names. So we want the listeners to give us more. Yeah, so we're going to rename the Big Ten because it's not right. It's not academic. They're not 10 teams. They haven't been for a while. And yeah, they're big, but we need more. You got to be big what? That's like, seems like that's a grammar error. So we're going to make them have a name. You can still say big, but if you name yourself Manifest Destiny Conference, you can say the Big Manifest Destiny Conference. If you want to say Coast to Coast Conference, you can legally do that in a few months when you add California. But anyway, we are going to have a Name the Big Ten contest. And you might as well do the Big 12 as well because they're not 12 teams either. They're 10. But they do play each other, primarily because they're only 10. You might learn something from the Big 12. Not how to play football, but you might learn something. They can count a little. Well, they can't count. Okay, but the Big 12 has lots of merits. Sure they do. All right, so Kyle, you came out with Manifest Destiny Conference. That was very clever. I like that one. So that one gets in. Manifest Destiny Conference is the standing Big Ten name change pending someone's adjustment. Kind of treat it like Wikipedia. If you got a better name, put a comment, and if we like it better, then we'll change it. Right here, I decide, me, what this name is. You can put all the applications you desire. We love to hear your suggestions for naming the Big Ten. We suggest you don't use numbers. All right, Kyle, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, naming the Big Ten, something has to be done. And that's a nice thing. We're not just joking. We really want these names. It has to be changed. But we're not going to talk about that the whole show. We're not going to do gags about the Big Ten. But if anybody comes up with something while you're listening, just type it in. I mean, we would like to have a whole lot of different names. And I said I'll decide. I meant that in a way that it will be decided fairly. And the only person that I trust to do that is me. Well, we'll figure it out. Maybe I'll get a committee to decide. Just get the names in. It'll be a fair and equitable decision. And the Big Ten will be named in a very proper way by loving people who thought about their situation and gave them a good name. It doesn't have to be smarty pants. Just give a name that's appropriate to the Big Ten. That's why I like Manifest Destiny so much. They represent the spirit of Manifest Destiny. The Big Ten from coast to coast. The Big Conference. Wow. The big. It's gotta have a name. Treat it with some respect. I mean, maybe some Big Ten fans might even send a suggestion. It doesn't have to be comical. What would you think your conference should be named? Why do you gotta stick with a stupid number when your conference is greedy and wants to expand Manifest Destiny style? I'm sorry. The Big Ten's had a tough year. I'm not going to rub salt into the wounds. Far be it from me to ever have done that willingly. Kyle, have I ever rubbed salt in a wound? Well, you rinse your mouth with salt water. Well, I suppose that... Okay. Well, I do it in a loving way. It's kind love. Tender sarcasm. Now, the Big Ten has some troubles this year because they had two teams in the playoffs, and they both lost. The next question we're going to talk about is which teams really had good years. Winners and losers. Which team? All right, Kyle, let's do it. We're going to take this past season's top 10, top 12, because very soon the top 12 will be playoff teams. Not hopefuls, playoff teams. So we'll take maybe the first dozen, the top 12, let's say. If this past season, 2022, let's look at this year's top 12. We'll take them one at a time, and we'll start at number 12, and we'll go up to number 1. And hopefully we can get this done in the time we have left. All right, so what we're trying to figure out is, of the current top 12 teams in 2022, which ones have a shot of progressing? In other words, let's look at this and we'll see if each one of those is gaining or losing. Is it an aberration that they're here right now? Or which ones are on a path, a reasonable path to getting to that national title? How many of these teams could win the national title soon? And how long will it take? Because they're in the top 12. That's very soon going to be the gold standard. And so how many of these teams really are worth playoff consideration? Let's take a look. All right, Kyle, roll them teams. We're going to start with the number 12, and we will proceed in like fashion and decide how many of these are imposters or legitimate contenders, and what's the likelihood of any of them returning to the top 12 next year and beyond. Alright, so with the help of Kyle, we did a little research, and we took the 12 teams as it finished this year. Alright, so you got your 12, and so next year, whenever they start the playoff, it's logical that'll be the playoff committee, the playoff field, 12 teams. So we just took this year we just finished, and we just charted it out. Top 12, and we used the format that's going to be used forever, or at least a while. So using the format for the future, that all these talking heads and babbling people on YouTube typing in their opinions. Oh, the playoffs need 12 teams. Why? Did the number of outstanding athlete suddenly increase? Well, no, we got playoffs now. I mean, we got transfer portal. So what are you saying? That because the distribution of a limited resource has been expanded, that the limited resource has increased? Huh? Never mind. Who would have won the darn playoff if we'd had 12 this year? Well, I found out. And you can play along. I charted it. You could do it. Take the top 12. Go Google the format the way I understood it. There's bias. It's complicated. And I might not have got it right. I think I did. It was pretty simple. It's a playoff. 4 teams have a bye. And the official poll for the season shows us we have Georgia as number 1, TCU number 2, Michigan number 3, Ohio State at 4. This is the official committee official results for the year. 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 5, Alabama. Number 6, Tennessee. Number 7, Penn State. Big. It's for the big conference. Number 8, Washington. I'm reading because I scratched them out because I charted this, you see. And so, Utah, Florida State, and SC. Okay, that's your field. That's your 12-team field that brought some very interesting games, which I will break that down in another video. I'm going to do that. We're going to chart the 12 teams and set it up the way it's done and chart it, and maybe I was wrong. It's hard to admit it when you're wrong. You see, I'm a traditionalist. I like tradition. I like to know how a playoff's going to be all the time. I don't like wondering what's going to happen, how they're going to jumble something up year to year. A traditionalist. But, like I said, I may have been wrong. The 12-team playoff may not be a disaster after all. So maybe we should spend our time advocating for no further expansion than the already ridiculous expansion, because you may not have got it right, but this year it wouldn't have been a total disaster. With some very good matchups that would have been provided, and we could spend hours talking about those matchups. Man, this playoff would have been a really good playoff. Guess what? Well, the regular season was pretty good too. So you got to consider that. But I'm going to wrap this up about the 12 teams. I wanted to talk about how these 12 teams project as future genuine national title contenders. And we'll do that ongoingly. We're doing stuff. We're thinking off season. We're planting the cabbage today, and tomorrow we'll put the turnips in. We're planting our winter garden of ideas for football, because it's not football season no more. It's over. It's off season. It's football in January. You got to get creative to enjoy football in January. And we're very creative, and we have decided we can do a lot with that last season poll. That's 12 football teams that should have been in the playoffs, and 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 more just sitting on the edge. Wow, we could take 8 years to play a season and still not know who the champion is. Luckily, we had a clear champion this year. That ain't always the case. We need a good playoff system. We're bitching about it. I don't like expanding it. This year, it wouldn't have been really that bad. So maybe it won't be that bad next year. I'm going to break this down a little bit, show you the games, and we can spend another video talking about how these games might have worked out, because some of them were tough. Some of these calls were tough. I mean, some of these games would have been pretty challenging to handicap. The way I broke it down, you have Alabama playing Southern Cal, and that's a tough call. You know, we could do a whole video on that alone. Tennessee and Florida State, what a game that would have been. But, you know, it's hard to really figure out who would have won. Penn State and Utah, I mean, that's a 50-50 coin flip. Washington and Tulane. I think Tulane's got that one, so you just have to go with the eye test. I mean, so just progressing with my eye test, I came up with it boiled down to Georgia was definitely the winner. In some of the games, Alabama would have played. How did we figure that one out? Alabama caught Ohio State, I think, and Tennessee. Anyway, some very interesting football games, but nothing would have changed the outcome. And I'm going to do another video. This one's gone way too long, and I hope it was useful, but it was kind of setting the rules for what we're doing in football in February, football in March, football in January, football in the off season. We got a few. I mean, we don't have a 12-month growing season here. We only play football for what, 5 months? Still leaves a lot of extra time. Anyway, so if you like football in the off season, you came to the right place. We like football all the time, and there's always something to do. And we're going to break down the hypothetical 12-team playoff that maybe coulda, shoulda, woulda happened this year, but it didn't. But still would have had some great ball games. But guess what? The same outcome would have happened. Yes. Anyway, so we're going to talk about that. If you like this video, you can flip over right now to the one about the projected playoff that should have been, that never was, the twilight zone of playoff hypothetical entertainment. Let's hope it was entertaining. No, but then we're going to break it down, because it actually would be really good to get those games and simulate them. And maybe some of you like doing that. I don't want to simulate 12 playoff games. But, you know, if you got the teams, I mean, sure, why wouldn't somebody like to do that? Get some idea. I can break it down. I mean, I can figure out who would have won. I can handicap a game. A lot of you guys can, too. And I know you can look at it and so on, but there's no way you can see a Georgia failing to have won any of the games assigned to them. And so the top number this year, and you could play it off in a million ways. We had the same champion. But wouldn't maybe have had a blowout in the finals. And that, people are like, that's the worst thing in the world. Yeah, it's a football game. All right, get the picture. They said he couldn't do it, but he tried to get this video in under 24 minutes, and the clock is ticking down as we watch the video end. And there's the final gun, and the video is now over. And show and tell has another video in the books. We'll be back in a minute with the tails and highlights. If you'd like to like and subscribe, well, that would be a good idea, because, well, YouTube likes to, they like that. Anyway, and we like to have our videos shown on YouTube, and it's been a really fun pleasure to provide this one to you. And if you've listened this far, well, you've already wasted 20 minutes of your life, so you may as well go to the next show and tell video on top that's probably showing on the right-hand screen right there.